Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to the Sikh Network Show. This is a program looking back at 2018 and also looking forward to 2019. The guest today on this show, on my left-hand side, is Jazz Singh, and to his left is Manveer Singh. So if we say Fateh first.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
2018, a huge number of things have gone on. We're going to try and focus in on some of the key achievements of the year. Jazz, what would you start off with? What would you point to one thing that would be a key achievement?
I think that, like you said, it's been a very busy year, not only for the Sikh network, but for Sikhs in general across the UK. Having 2 MPs elected last year meant that we were far more able to influence policy and decision makers. And I'd say the biggest overall achievement has been progress on the manifesto items.
Yeah.
So although we were successful in achieving maybe 2 or 3 in their entirety and progressing another 2 or 3, but just the overall progress in that 12-month period has probably been the largest, whilst we've been dealing with a lot of challenges as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a mixed year in that we've made a lot of progress, but we've also had some key challenges.
So let's try and focus in on the Sikh manifesto then. The first item in the manifesto was about better political representation, and that's clearly been helped by having the 2 Sikh MPs there, Preet Kaur Gill and Manjeet Singh Desi. But actually this has been the first full year they've been there. Let's just take some of those issues that were in the manifesto that they have themselves been able to lead on. Perhaps identity related issues, because we have issues in there around, say, Panj Kakar, and we've seen a threat to our Badi Kirpan. That wasn't there at the start of the year. That wasn't there. That developed towards the end of the year, but that was a huge achievement. And then we've had the slightly longer term objective, achieving the code of practice. Do you want to just go and unpick that issue?
Yeah, I think that's what I'll start with. Is the first thing was better representation, and yes, we got 2 MPs, but I think it's right to actually recognise that the achievement both of them have made as well. Preet, who then became chair of the APPG for British Sikhs, and has done a tremendous job in spearheading Sikh issues, not only some manifesto related, but also cross-party political issues from Westminster directly, supported by Dan Manjeet and many other sort of older established MPs like Pat McFadden and John Speller, etc., and Dominic Grieve. So I think, but also Preet being a board member of the Sikh network and someone that we supported and championed all the way through, her becoming a shadow minister as well.
That was within 6 months, wasn't it? It was
6
right
months,
at the start of the year.
And going from the Home Affairs Select Committee and then moving on to become a shadow minister. I think these were huge achievements for the first Sikh woman MP. And again, that showed the calibre of professionals that we wanted to attract into the network, which is why we formed the Sikh network, and actually supporting them going forward. And I just also touch on, it has also encouraged and inspired others. People like Jazz Atwal, who's the council leader in Redbridge, who's also become very prominent, and others across the parties who are now using Preet and Dan Manjeet as their role models to demonstrate that Sikhs at all levels, at all parties, can be active in Parliament. The hope is that they continue that and actually still don't neglect the Panthik duties, which both Preet and Dan Manjeet has done tremendously.
I think certainly as well, from just a broader professional perspective beyond the political sphere, I think it's shown that actually glass ceilings can be broken, and certainly there was a glass ceiling from a political perspective. The manifesto point's been dealt with to a certain extent from that side of things, but Sikhs in all spans of professionalism, that glass ceiling has definitely been broken by this significant change that's taken place. So
I'm going to unpick that first item, which is great having 2 Sikh MPs. That was the first item on the agenda, but actually this was about better representation by all our MPs. And I think what they've done really well on separate issues, whether it be the census issue, whether it be the monument issue, they've got literally hundreds of other MPs behind them. They simply had to show them the way.
Cross-party too.
And we've seen that in the lobbies we've done. And we'll touch on some of these issues where we've had to specifically lobby. Just the MPs who have attended lobbies, supported lobbies, We'll touch on these in more detail, but just to give a flavour, the Gurpurab event has been very well attended, cross-party. We had the Remembrance book signing, which over 140 MPs signed cross-party.
That's the Sikh genocide.
On 1984. We've had more MPs attending Gurdwara. So just the awareness of Sikhs in a positive light has been helped by having those, and I think that's, I won't say put pressure on, but that's also put a spotlight on MPs where they are non-Sikh but in Sikh constituent areas to be more up to date with issues. And Jaggi's case is probably the most biggest issue where most MPs have been following that case, because if you look at the letters they sent back, they were updated on what the issues were. They had raised it with the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Ministers, and that just gave us an indication of actually as a community how politically active and powerful we were becoming. So, but just to go back to your question, Baji, around the Sikh identity, because ultimately that's our core piece. There were a number of issues within the manifesto which addressed this, and I think this is something which came back to light and just reminded us of how important it is when Dan Manjit spoke, the first turban-wearing MP in Parliament, and then one of his guests visiting, his dastar was attempted to be removed outside Parliament itself. And that just showed everybody actually that hate crime, specifically targeting Sikhs, is an issue. And it'd been overlooked by government and officials and even the police because of this whole, how do we report it, how do we categorize it, and it not to be misunderstood with Islamophobia. So I think from a network's perspective, reminding policymakers and decision makers of our Sikh identity, it became paramount. And we had live cases, whether it was the dastar issue at Parliament, whether it was the hate crime attacks on our Gurdwara in Edinburgh, where there was an arson attack and another Gurdwara. These things all really fundamentally surrounded around two issues, around accurately recording hate crime, but more importantly around the identity, the kakar issues that we had around the code of practice, because a lot of this stemmed from people not understanding the core basic principles of Sikhi and the 5 tenets. And I think those two together really reminded us actually, although we've made progress, we had a lot of work to do. And I think some of the progress we made has been really helpful and positive.
I think there's, it came to a head, more recently and later in 2018, where, the Offensive Weapons Bill was put to Parliament, and an amendment needed to be made to obviously protect one of the Panch Kakars. And again, I think that showed obviously bringing obviously representation, that actually a lot of ministers were made aware that this was an issue again. And certainly I think, a lot of work was done from colleagues at Sikh Federation, other Sikh institutions obviously did a lot of work to ensure that, the Gurban was protected and amendments were put through government and voted through.
Although we've got these 10 issues in the manifesto, they're actually intertwined. And that's why our conversations are now jumping between issues. But if I take that example of, here was, 2 Sikh MPs got together with other MPs, cross-party, 20 of them put down an amendment to deal with the Offensive Weapons Bill. But actually their real strength was they got to government. And government took the lead. It was Breed's meeting with Sajid Javid, which she had actually started the ball rolling last year when she was on the Home Affairs Select Committee. That actually sent the message actually to lots of other politicians that here you haven't just got Sikh MPs, but you've got Sikh MPs that can work cross-party and with government to get things done.
And I think just to sort of illustrate some of those key issues, because when we talked about hate crime, as you mentioned, the government and the Cabinet Office had launched its hate crime action plan, and Prime Minister had launched her race audit across government. And both of these issues, and they're important, and we raised them, although they weren't specific in items in the manifesto, they were, like you said, intertwined with our identity, because what that meant was we were excluded. So Breed, in her role as the Home Affairs Select Committee, she questioned Amar Rudd, the Home Secretary, in that why were Sikhs excluded and whether they would be. And despite the Home Secretary's assurances, we were in fact excluded. And the reasons why we were excluded was because of the framework that exists in government and within all 40,000 public bodies is based on the ethnic structure that is defined in the census. And we're going to cover census specifically because it's probably one of the biggest issues we've worked on. But if I just sort of break that down in terms of what was the issue and how we worked on it, was that we then sat down with the Cabinet Office. We had a meeting with Zamila, who heads the race audit, and explained to her the importance of monitoring Sikhs. And they fully understood and fully accepted that they were falling short. And even at risk of discrimination, because by law, Sikhs are identified as an ethnic race and a religion. So government knew there was a huge gap. They knew they were potentially discriminating against a Sikh community. And they knew that we could raise these issues at the highest level of government. I think they were struggling because of the lack of historic data. From an audit perspective, because they'd never captured it, they couldn't report on it. And similarly with the Hate Crime Action Plan, when we highlighted these issues through our quarterly roundtables, through ministerial meetings that we'd lobbied for and worked with Preet and with other MPs, was that they weren't as prioritised as Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And that's not to take away that they weren't as serious. But I think as Sikhs, it was our duty to make sure that not only do we report these crimes, but they also are addressed appropriately by the establishment. And I think by having these and raising them at that profile, it meant government had to do things and do things differently. And I think we're now seeing the ball and the wheels turn now because of the Hate Crime Action Plan refresh. Promised that it would look at Sikhs, and it has done. And since then, as you mentioned, the meeting with Sajid Javid has resulted in there being a specific focus for the Sikh community, and that will look at how do we track hate crime, what is the process end to end, and what are the mechanisms that we can adopt to report it and then look at the remedial action. But all of this activity has stemmed from pressure, raising and articulating the issues with the outcome, how it's affected our community, with stats and figures that the whole network team has done. I mean, the three of us are here today, but the team of 15 of our core board members and the extended team have been on this in their own specialism, and that's been the really output of it.
So if I go back, because this isn't something you just achieve in 1 year. So you had the UK Sikh survey in 2016. At the end of that year, when we had a cross-government meeting and issues like the Code of Practice came up, hate crime came up, the Hate Crime Action Plan came up, and how Sikhs were cut out, is how do you feel now we've been through 2018, there have been some clear achievements, the offensive weapons bill's been mentioned, Code of Practice, I think there's been lots of progress in the year, perhaps it's worth expanding on that.
I think that, I'm sure because he's been in a few meetings on that as well, and it's just important to say what the Code of Practice really actually is that if we think back, not only this year, but previous years, the amount of cases we've had where school children with the dastars have been sent home. We had the 2 girls in Southampton. We've had children attending school with the kirpans, Amritari's children, pupils with the kirpan that have been sent home. And we had the airport issue in that they wanted to remove the dastar for airport security across Europe. And all of those together, when we put the manifesto item around the Code of Practice, was to raise awareness, better understanding and best practice for all government departments. That would be defined in the Code of Practice that these are the tenets of the Sikh faith, these are the kakars, and this is what they mean, and here's good practice and best practice across institutes of how you maintain safety and safeguard health and safety without compromising the faith. And a document was drafted, so we had cross-community support on this. We met with 23 different organisations last year and got their support, their comments, to have a collective community document that is now ready in its final draft. And I think what we've now done this year, specifically towards the latter end of the year, is have discussions with that, because there's individual incidents like the offensive weapons bill that we'll come on in a second, but which brought out of that. But was because of the hate crime issues, because of these identity issues we were having, is that with the new Home Secretary Sajid Javid, when these issues were raised, he was very supportive and has actually committed to not only writing the forward to the Code of Practice, but also hosting it when we launch it. And what that will mean for everybody out there is that whilst we had the Equality Human Rights Commission guidance from 2010, that's been sort of removed and needed to be updated anyway. The network has taken that task on. We've worked with the community, we've defined the document, and once it gets launched with governmental support, actually becomes very powerful because it will be endorsed by the Home Office, the Equalities Ministers, and the Department of Education. Actually, and plus with the fully backing support of the Equality Human Rights Commission, then that will be the go-to document. It will be on the government websites. That should and will protect employers, employees, students and schools, institutes, and also the health service from any further discrimination. I think that is a huge issue, one that we needed for a number of years. Many have worked on individual cases, but to collectively wrap that up in a code of practice, I think, and we're nearly there. The plan is to launch that early next year, around March. But I guess out of that came the Kirpan issue, and then obviously I know both of you guys were on it, and I think it's probably useful to demonstrate how one issue of the code of practice nearly became a problematic issue in law for us if we hadn't have turned it around when we did.
And certainly, from just moving on to that and on a more specific level, I don't want to downplay the threat to the Gurban in the latter part of 2018. I don't think the wider community is aware of the restrictions that were being put onto the Gurban itself, and the distinction of 50 centimetres in length over or under would have meant the difference between Sikhs potentially being subject to imprisonment ultimately for a significant length of time for simply practicing their faith, which sounds almost discriminatory in nature, which effectively it was, and it's due to adept work of certainly Preet Dhanmanjit and obviously the British the APPG for British Sikhs just coming to the fore, utilising the network, engaging with community, and more importantly engaging with government and moving effectively to curb that issue.
I mean, one thing I will add is that out of these issues, and I think, again, what Manveer said, no one watching at home should underestimate the threat that we faced. And I think because it happened in such a quick period of time, it probably hasn't sunk in with many. Because I've still spoken to many people that don't realise how close we were to having the Bid Gurban banned. And it was only, many looked at the legislation and didn't see the threat. Actually, it was in the supplementary documents, which you've read in detail. And actually, when we met with the Home Office, you knew it better than they did, which is why they became unstuck. And that's why the government accepted the amendment. Otherwise, if there was no risk, they wouldn't have amended it. And I think I've spoken to people recently who felt that there wasn't an issue, but actually there was a huge issue. But I think because we dealt with it so swiftly, it was useful. But I think one thing out of that is really what it drove us to do and rethink of how we engage as a community, because most of the Sikh orgs, bar the Sikh Federation, missed it. They all missed it. Those that call themselves representative, they still probably haven't understood what the issue was. And the Federation took the lead, worked with Preet, and Preet relentlessly stayed on it and made it her priority. But I think what that made us do was, how do we structure and engage as a community? And I think, again, as a network, we sat back and said, yes, whilst we have the Sikh network, there are many Sikh organisations out there that we still need to connect with. And I think that the concept of the Sikh Roundtable was really born out of this one issue, in that we need to be better aware and better prepared for issues that come out like this and threats, so then we have a collective response. And we had our first Sikh Roundtable, which was attended by 17 Sikh organisations out of the 23 invited, which is a great response. It was here in Birmingham. And we have the second planned for early part of this year. So I think that's, again, it's just moved us forward, that whilst we recognise the threat and the challenge, we dealt with it, but we've also thought of more sustainable practices and structures that we need as a community to be able to deal with them.
Exactly, and I think we should probably take some time to actually just drill into that detail that was, sitting behind that legislative issue that we were facing. And I think the amendment meant that we'd gone from a point of religious ceremony being acceptable to religious reasons, which would be a lot more acceptable more broadly of the Sikh community beyond maybe a gurdwara or a specific event that might be taking place like Nagar Kirtan. So, you know, and that little change in the wording has actually protected the situation.
Just to give you an example, so there is currently a case going through the courts of a Singh with a 3-foot kirpan. So the lawyer's been in contact with us as the legislation's been going through, and he said this is really helpful because obviously that's affecting an individual that's currently going through the courts. And he basically now just point to the legislation as it stands, because it's still to go through the House of Lords. But can I, because time is really going by very quickly, there's one aspect of identity, I want to come back to the census, but the other aspect to the identity is around this year we've seen the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. And one of the key demands in the manifesto was the need for a site in central London, but not only have we a site in central London now in mind, we also have, you know, a wonderful monument just down the road outside Guru Nanak Gurdwara Smithik. So that, I think lots of ordinary Sikhs up and down the country and actually across the globe have said, wow, what an achievement.
Well, it was certainly just travelling to the studio today, it's a great source of pride, you know, just passing by, seeing Smithik Gurdwara obviously, and right outside it is this, you know, monument that is, you know, on full display, can be seen from many hundreds of yards away, and is a source of pride. The shaheeds of that great war, let's make no mistake about it, they were subject to racism in the trenches from their own co-militia from various parts of the world, and they were going through those issues despite the fact that they're having to fight an enemy as well. So, you know, I don't think we can ever underestimate the trials and tribulations that those particular shaheeds went through. And the fact that, you know, now what's happened is we've had all these orgs come together under the and Dhanmanjit Desi is now moving forward from a London perspective, and, you know, making that happen, we should see significant progress in 2019.
I mean, this was a key issue in the manifesto, in that actually, because this had been airbrushed out of history, the Sikh contribution particularly, and we've often quoted the numbers, 83,000 turban-wearing Sikhs had died and 109,000 injured, and we'd also been to Ep1 and Menon Gate and seen the names etched on the wall there as a permanent reminder, but in this country there wasn't any. But I think there's been a whole wind of change since we had it in the manifesto. We've had a monument in Gravesend of Burji, the RAF pilot. There has been monuments in Leeds, which was opened at the Castle School. One planned for Huddersfield, Bristol, and Coventry. So monuments have been going across Europe, and we've been connecting to all of those groups. But the two big ones that you mentioned was London was our primary focus, and the National War Monument Trust has been set up, and we have our board members that are part of the board there. And I think it's great that we can announce the site, although it's not formally announced, but we know it will be close to Trafalgar Square. It's a pertinent site because you have pictures, and we have pictures of Sikh regiments walking down the mall, through past Trafalgar Square, and it's just behind where we have the June rally as well. So that's the fitting place where the monument will be. Designs are still out there, but that's something which, as you mentioned, Dhanmanjit and Mankamal Singh are leading on. But the Birmingham one, I think, was a key position, well, because that's something that Preet had started while she was a councillor here, and the management committee with Hamraj and Jatinder Singh really led the initiative, and one is something that was very, very prominent of the Sikh identity in the star, the beard, City Sahib, because that's what they fought with. And it was the fact that above all of everything else they were facing, oppressors in India against the Sikh kingdom itself, but above all, realising their duty and Sikh values, they went and fought a bigger tyrant in the Germans and helped secure freedom for the Allies. So that as a permanent reminder for all is a huge achievement, and that's something we've worked very closely with G&G committee with.
I think it's also key to, just coming back to the London site moving forward, is just obviously the financial backing that's been secured from a governmental perspective.
Yeah.
Certainly at the launch of the National Sikh War Memorial Trust, Sajid Javid, decided to match the contributions made by the community.
Yeah.
So that's quite a significant contribution, and let's hope it goes towards making a great design
we should
for
also
the
mention,
focal point.
because these, in the past, commitments like that have been made, and actually there's been very little follow-up.
Yeah.
However, because of the quarterly roundtables, the government host,
Yeah.
primarily through Ministry of Local Housing and Local Government,
Yeah.
is that we've raised this there as well, multiple times with Lord Bourne, and again, they've reiterated that commitment. So it is on record, it is formalised,
Yeah.
and we do have a mechanism where the Sikh Network attend, the Sikh Federation attend, and also the APBG for British Sikhs, where we have a collective voice that actually we can influence the agenda,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
influence the updates,
Yeah.
and we also remind the government of its commitments and ask their updates. And that's really how we're able to drive this forward, despite some of the resistance that we might face from our own community that also attend these meetings.
So just trying to link up two issues there as well. So you've got the Lions of the Great War Memorial
Yeah.
outside the Gurdwara here in Smethwick. And I know that when Bree said she started that off, effectively because of the manifesto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Manifesto was there, she was a councillor, she wasn't an MP, she worked with the local council, and then that's created pressure on government to say, in Smethwick, you know, if you look at the total cost of the project, the Gurdwara paid for the actual statue, about £30,000. But the council, despite all the pressure from people that didn't want this monument, was largely dedicated towards the Sikh sacrifices, you know, that's put pressure on central government to say, you know, they didn't match fund, they actually put in the bulk of the funding for that area.
We shouldn't ignore the fact that there are people out there, and it's sad to see that there's some of them are Sikhs that get misused to dilute the Sikh contribution and blend it into wider South Asian or Indian. I mean, it's not to say that other Indians and Muslims and other South Asians didn't contribute. Absolutely they did. But we are Sikh.
Yeah.
And our duty is to recognise the Sikh contribution first, as well as everybody else's.
Yeah.
And we've never stopped or interfered in anyone else having a monument. In fact, effectively, we supported a South Asian monument that's been also looked at in London, and we fully back that. But it is bizarre when people will try dilute the Sikh contribution, and we've seen that in the census particularly as well, in that Sikhs have been misused, to become an opposition to something that hundreds of thousands of Sikhs have demanded. And this has been, I'd say, a priority issue for the network, and something that we've devoted a lot of time to.
So just before coming on to the census, one thing at the Gurdwara event that a lot of people might not have picked up was Sajid Javid was actually given one of the awards on Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Gurpurb. And we know it was because he was the one, as the Communities Minister, that announced the funding for the war monument. He was the one that said, I'll fully back the code of practice, write the forward, be there at the launch next year. He's the one that started to make changes on hate crime when it comes to Sikhs. And what we've just seen towards the end of the year, he's been taking the lead on really difficult issues like grooming. So I think it's worth focusing on that aspect that we haven't touched upon, the whole issue of grooming, because that's a massive issue.
And this is something where we raised the issue because it was our duty, and that's what the feedback we got from the community. And certainly working with grassroots organisations like Sikh Youth UK, like the Sikh Helpline and SAS, who've been doing this for many years, is that actually bringing this to the agenda and the attention of government. And in the quarterly roundtables with government, we've done this with the Home Office, we've raised it with DCLG, and persistently pursued it. And again, it's not to say that there have been Sikh representatives, academics from Birmingham, who have tried to dismiss this issue, that it even exists. But thankfully, with the research and the evidence that the groups have provided, we managed to secure a local meeting in Birmingham in October, where the Home Office and MHCLG came down to Birmingham. They met with the grassroots organisations. It was facilitated by the Sikh Network, and Baljit Kaur led that, and she's been working in this field over the last 4 to 5 months now. And at that meeting, the Sikh community groups and Sikh Youth UK presented the Home Office and MHCLG with the race report.
Yep.
So the religiously aggravated sexual exploitation of Sikh women, which was a 80-page report study into cases over spanning decades, starting from the 60s and 70s, and real life cases. And that is a real hard fact-based study, which then government have been compelled to conduct its own research on. And that is something which you've now had, and many politicians have shied away from, and I will call out Sarah Champion, who's been at the forefront of actually raising these issues and highlighting where it's been organised. The ethnicity and background of those gangs has been Pakistani Muslim. Yeah. And this is something which Sajid Javid has been very vocal on. And that's something which, whilst the Sikh organisations were stating this, they were deemed as racist by Sikhs.
Yeah.
And actually, when you have the Home Secretary call this out, this has been vindication of all their work. And now, with the Sikh Network working in that facilitation role, with the grassroots, so we can be that bridge to actually drive real sustainable change. And I know the community have backed the SMART project with a huge amount of funding, and that's something that we fully back and support. Indeed. And that will give us those institutes that we need to deal with this issue going forward.
Okay. Basically, those watching KTV, this is a Sikh Network show. We're bringing to you a review of 2018 and some of the issues that have been ongoing and remain ongoing. We were talking about some of the key achievements with respect to the Sikh Manifesto. Before we talk about the census, there's an issue about schools. Having as many Sikh schools as possible by 2020. We've seen the opening of the Artham Academy, the new building. We've seen a new building in Derby. We've also had the challenge of the Seva School in Coventry, of maintaining a Sikh school. Mm-hmm. How quickly do you think we're progressing towards that target? Because it is becoming more difficult now.
It is, and I think it's one of those where, again, it was a key issue in the manifesto that we wanted it, and I think that, again, it highlighted to Sikhs across the UK that we could have Sikh schools. There were model schools in Slough, in Leeds, that they could use as a template for local communities with a strong need and a strong base. They could put the applications in, and I think it was, again, commendable to the Conservative government policy where it fully funded faith schools, it fully supported those. And under that policy, Derby Akal Academy was set up, and they've now moved this year in 2018 into its permanent site, which is a wonderful site in Derby. Artham Academy, which is a full-through school, so primary to secondary, has opened in a magnificent building in Redbridge. In that area, and so that demonstrates that actually not only can we fill these schools, not only with Sikhs but with non-Sikhs, but the value systems that are being taught through these schools appeal to many non-Sikhs as well. And that is something which I think is being respected and acknowledged by people from the wider public. We've seen other school applications go in. I know Smethwick are looking, Gravesend are considering, Newcastle have been considering. I think the issue we got now is with the change in policy, in the percentage contribution that communities need to. I think it's 10% of the funding has to come from local Sikh groups. And if you talk about a multi-million-pound project, then it's significant amount of costs that have to be found from the community. So it does give people more thought, but I think, again, with that wider learning and case that you can demonstrate, you should be able to raise that not only from Sikh funds or Gurdwara, actually take it out to the local community and get other funding, because 10% shouldn't be a blocker for having these schools, because they will benefit not only Sikhs but also many non-Sikhs across the UK.
I think what we'll do is we'll try and get Nashetra and Kamal here and talk about this, because I know there's a huge demand. When Nashetra spoke in September at Willenhall Gurdwara, people from Manchester, all sorts of different locations wanted to talk to him about the schools they've set up in Wolverhampton, Slough, in East London, etc. Census issue, we've touched on it several times. This is clearly work in progress. Just before Christmas, we heard that the Census White Paper, the ONS, in their proposals to government, had not recommended a Sikh ethnic tick box. Clearly, we will know by the end of 2019, whether we have one or not. How would you describe that as it's an achievement in terms of the campaign,
Yeah.
but actually the campaign's halfway through?
So, and I think if you look about it, if we go back to 2015, we actually started working with ONS, the Office of National Statistics, at the end of 2014 was the first meeting.
Summer of 2014, because I was out the country.
And we started off with demonstrating the evidence from the 2011 census, in that 84,000 Sikhs had protested individually, not by any campaign, not by any agenda, individually, that they felt they wanted a Sikh tick box on there. They ticked other and wrote in Sikh. 84,000. Using the population figures of the census, that was 20% of the population protested. That's a huge amount. And there was very little media, very little promotion of this. So to get a 20% response rate was a huge issue. So we reminded ONS of that. Yeah. We also provided them with the legality aspect of Sikhs being an ethnic race, and that shouldn't be ignored. And over the next year and a half, 2 years, we had numerous meetings with the ONS, provided them with various types of evidence. So they did their own process. They had open consultations twice, to which many Sikh organizations responded, many users of data, so health officials, universities, education, departments, councils, many responded, many Sikhs responded. I think not one of the consultations objected to the Sikh tick box. I think that should be noted that throughout this period.
Could I stop you, because that was one of the real telling signs of the census white paper and all the attachments, that they didn't even talk about their own consultations in 2015 and 16, because they were just 100% in support.
Exactly. And it got worse, because then after that they talked through their whole process with us, and their process involved 3 stages. And it was consultation, official testing, and also their stakeholder groups, qualitative and qualitative testing that they wanted to do. And in their own testing, it was inconclusive, but actually all the trends were positive. If you looked at the numbers, it was flawed in how they did it, and we raised this with them, and they acknowledged that as well. Yeah. But even still, the numbers were in the right trajectory. Their qualitative and the evidence we provided the UK Sikh survey, that in which 93% of the 4,500 respondents said they welcomed a separate tick box, and actually more than 93% preferred to have ticked Sikh as opposed to Indian or Asian, given the choice. So these were real hard factual stuff, and we gave all of that data to ONS. They then met with Sikh organisations. They met with the Sikh Federation, they met with the Sikh Council, they met with Gurdwaras, they held their own consultations, they had a wider, not specific to a community, but a wider feedback stakeholder session in which they shortlisted the 4. Roma, Gypsies, Somalians, Sikhs, and the Jewish community.
This was in December 2017.
And that's when the first time Ian Bell, the director of ONS, said that they would extend the time frame in which to respond, and they would continue. And then just before, in October last year, they had a stakeholder group Sikh meeting.
Which they invited people to.
Which they invited many Sikh groups to. And what was bizarre when they were challenged of how did this fit into their process? Because it kind of seemed that they'd done their process, didn't come to the conclusion that other powers that be may have wanted. They had to do other things. And they started this whole re-engineering of how to create an obstacle or a sort of negative view of the census, an opposition. And that started, despite it starting there, I think there was 2 groups that were umming and ahhing about opposition. City Sikhs was one, and Lord Singh and the NSO were the other. But ultimately, having heard all the conversation, when they asked everybody to...
I want to ask Manvir this question.
He was there as
well. So Manvir, what basically got to the end, and obviously, before we even got to the end, they said, we want to put 3 options to you.
They did, yep.
One option was, you already have an optional religious tick box. So the first option is, you want to keep the religious tick box that's optional and also have an ethnic Sikh tick box. That's option one. Option two was you just have a religious tick box, as is now. Status quo is 2000. And third one is you don't want a religious tick box, you just want an ethnic tick box. And I remember when they first just introduced it, Gurmil Singh stood up and said, you're trying to divide the community.
Yeah.
You're trying to divide the community.
Exactly.
And they had lots of feedback from individuals, you know, from all sorts of organisations, and they list those organisations on their own website. And then right at the end, when they sensed they didn't get the answer they want. I know Jaswinder Singh asked a question, but I want you to tell the audience, what was the reaction when they asked people to put up their hands to those three options?
98% of the people that attended that meeting stated that they wanted both an ethnic tick box and a religious tick box. So it was a de facto categoric confirmation from representative Sikh bodies that this was a requirement for the community. In addition, this, and obviously as Jaswinder has stated, it's outside of the normal process that they stated that they would follow to reach conclusions, and it compounds the evidence that they'd accrued up to that point of the fact that the box was desired, wanted, and required by the community.
So let me just clarify this. So when you did the UK Sikh survey, 4,500 people, you asked that question, and 93.5% said we would like a Sikh ethnic.
Yeah.
Their own people they had invited that had City Sikhs there, NSO there, some academics. Basically, their own holding up the hand showed 98% were supportive of an ethnic.
Absolutely.
tick box.
And I think this is where it really sort of the dynamic started to change, because if you look at the mounting evidence, we had 84,000 Sikhs individually. 20% of the population demanded and demonstrated they all wanted a Sikh tick box. You had the legal aspect, which is the case in law, Mandela versus Lee.
Yeah.
You then had over 170 MPs and still counting, on top of an EDM which had many other hundreds, including Theresa May and David Cameron signatories. So politicians supported this. You then had 115 Gurdwara independently write to politicians. So the APPG, not to any Sikh organisation, it's not a one Sikh organisation campaign, which represented nearly 400,000 of the Sangat, the congregation. The biggest voice of Sikhs on any issue that I've worked on spoke unanimously that this was a primary priority for the Sikh community. And against that, you had, in addition, you had the consultations and their testing and the UK Sikh survey. So all of this was the mounting evidence on one side. And on the opposite side, we are yet to see any tangible evidence. ONS have not made any public, not shared anything where there is a divided view in the community other than Lord Singh, who's made his views very public, City Sikhs, who've made their views very public, individually, not as an organisation, and the odd academic. But there is nothing that is tangible that they can point to that is a point of data fact. And for fact-based organisations, statistic-based organisations, we can't understand how they would have come to that conclusion, which is now where we are now, is around what actually will be the next phase of the campaign, and that's something that we will go on to when we cover.
But just from my perspective, just to reiterate the point, the law supports the issue, the evidence supports the issue, so it's unfathomable that we've got to this situation with a fact-based organisation that's declined this ethnic tick box.
I'm going to take the liberty, we've only got 10 minutes to cover human rights issues and the way forward. I think on the way forward on this, I think we might as well deal with it now because it is so crucial that basically there's a white paper that's published. There will be a census order that the government will put down probably in the autumn of 2019. But we have already seen that Ruth raised this issue on the floor of the House before Christmas, and the overwhelming, the House was packed. Just before Prime Minister's questions. And when she spoke, for less than probably 30 or 40 seconds, politicians on all sides were very supportive. And this is another one, cross-party support, because it's such a long campaign over at least 20 years that ONS have done what they wanted to do. We can set out all this evidence that they didn't look at or have ignored. But I think it's worth explaining to viewers what they can do.
Yeah, I think what has become clear, again, out of these activities, what comes clear is the detractors' tactics. And the detractors in our community have played their hand. They are now being rewarded by whatever means they will be, in terms of how they have they've attempted to deny Sikhs their right for services across the UK and actually official counting. But for us, we kind of picked up that vibe, despite the mainstream media attention as well. So I think everybody watching at home, first of all, they should understand the issue. This is about provision of services and equality for UK Sikhs. It's not about anything else other than that. We have a legal right, we have identified. It's not a case of anyone's specific opinion, whether we're ethnic race or not. It's not for us, it's the framework that exists in this country. We're not going to change that, so it's about being part. If you're not counted, you don't count. That's as simply as what it is. But MPs now, the effort will be both political and legal. We have a powerful team of lawyers that are willing to look at this case, and we are in conversation with those and what form and what route that will look like. But ultimately, politically is where we'll put a lot of pressure. And I think individually at Gurdwaras, and individually when you write or meet your MP, and we'll set out more plans in the new year, will be to contact your MP and ensure that they support this. Support whether it's an amendment, support the awareness that actually many have already done so in the letters that we talked about. So it won't be new to them, but it is about that individual activism, taking responsibility, and they have a huge role to play here. Otherwise, for generations, Sikhs, our children, their children, just won't be counted and won't be recognised.
So we've got about 8 minutes to cover the issue of human rights, and we've done whole programmes on this. So on the 1984 issue, 3 things we want to try and cover. One is Jeremy Corbyn made a commitment at Watford Gurdwara when Jagtar Singh Dhinsa was standing for Mayor of Watford, that this was a manifesto commitment in the last manifesto, but it will also be a manifesto commitment if there's another general election. And also he's on record saying, whilst we're in opposition, we will push for this. That's one aspect. The other one is in June of this year, for the first time, we had a 1984 Sikh Genocide Remembrance book. And at the same time, we also had the FOI case, which I know, Manveer, you were involved in, working alongside the researcher in terms of finding those bits of evidence, compiling that report, which, Sacrifice Sikhs report, although it's published in 2017, actually the tribunal, the judge, the 2 lay people actually looked at the report for the first time and actually gave a view about it. Can you try and cover some of those issues?
Well, look, it was an incredibly large piece of work. There's a lot of contribution from the Sikh network. The Sikh Federation fundamentally put it forward. Phil Miller did tremendous work in bringing it together. There are obviously files that we weren't able to review and see, and the only way in which we'd gain access to them was to take it through a tribunal hearing. That tribunal concluded, middle part of 2018, and the judge effectively stated, that the files should be opened and provided and given access to. Which effectively vindicated the view that Phil had taken whilst doing his research, and obviously the Sikh Federation and more broadly the wider Sikh community's view was as well.
Isn't there a confusion out there though? Because people look at the FOI case, which is a tribunal case, which is to obscure the release of some files, and the wider issue of an independent public inquiry, because the judgment went further. To actually say that the Hayward Review was good enough.
And I think that if we look at 1984, and in the manifesto there was two issues really. One was the independent public inquiry, and one was justice and a UN-led inquiry into the events of November 1984, the Sikh genocide there. And we've had, although it's not something we've directly been involved in, but the continuous lobbying and continuous raising it with politicians here and putting it on the agenda for Theresa May, for Chogam and other events, we have seen the likes of Fulkar and be successful in the courts very recently, and that's although we take that with a pinch of salt until we actually see all of the perpetrators be convicted and serve their terms, but we are seeing small movements from there, which I think when politicians now look at it, having seen those convictions, they actually, I won't say vindicates, but it certainly gives a huge amount of credibility to the reports and the work and the campaigning that has been done in the UK. And if we look about the independent public inquiry, that was about having a documented, fact-based, evidence-based report into the UK government's role in Operation Blue Star and the Darbar Sahib attack. And like you said, Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party, made it an official Labour commitment in their manifesto. And the Sacrifice and Sikhs report went hand in hand to give it that evidence to say the Hayward review that was done by the Cabinet Secretary, well, the late Jamie Hayward now, was inadequate. It just didn't look at it, and it purposely didn't look at it because they know they were guilty and they were culpable. So I think the report that's come in, the FOI appeal decision that said the Hayward review was inadequate, and actually there was much more wider public interest here. And I think where we are now is that lawyers are responding back to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and they will use the judgment, they will use the report and compel the government to actually look at a public inquiry or pursue a legal route. Because I think ultimately this isn't going to go away. I think they know it's not going to go away. The evidence is there. There's a hell of a lot more that will continue to come out, but there is more than enough out there to warrant a public inquiry. And again, whilst I say we haven't achieved it it hasn't been announced, we've done a huge amount this year to raise the profile of it, not only with politicians, but getting legal recognition in this space. That ultimately, whether there's a change of government, we have a commitment that it will be honoured, or whether the Conservative government realise that they need to do something, that we will get traction.
I think the key thing to keep in mind as well is that year on year we will have a release of files. And you know, even now there are FOI requests that have gone in and are still months on end still have not been responded to, and they are explicit files relating to Sikh agitations. And so, as Baji said, I think the only real way to deal with this in a holistic kind of manner is to actually go through a public inquiry and deal with all of these issues. This leads on
to our next issue, because what we saw and what many read in Sacrifice and Sikh report was the anti-Sikh measures that were being deployed in the UK by the police and by the government. And if we fast forward to 2018, we saw the abduction, the torture and the continued detention of Jagtar Singh, Jahal Jaggi, who we all know about, and we've all followed the case. And then we've had the raids in the UK on the 5 Sikhs, that houses were raided predominantly for the search of evidence to use against Jaggi in India. And again, prominent UK lawyer Gareth Pearce that we've liaised with, and the Network and Federation are managing that relationship. She's challenging the government and the Westminster Counter-Terrorism Unit on that. But this just played into actually what was happening with Jaggi, and actually the role of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But he again took a huge lead in this role, as did the APPG. But she not only did she meet Jaggi's brother in Delhi while she was there. I know myself and yourself and other members have been on constantly with his brother and the campaign team. But this is something that we've had 2 adjournment debates in Parliament. Breed led one, Martin led one, and continuously questions have been raised about the detaining and the torture primarily of a British citizen by India, and the questions of extreme action that were promised by the minister that haven't come to fruition. We've had Foreign Secretary changes. Boris Johnson moved on with now Jeremy Hunt, who's now being challenged to meet with the family. So again, this is something that, whilst it's ongoing, the profile of this case has been the highest of any foreign national from Britain. Redress, who've supported the campaign, again, we engaged with Redress and got them on board. That actually they've said no other foreign national or British national detained abroad had the Prime Minister publicly come out and had this many questions raised on the floor of the Commons. So there has been huge amount of political pressure raised out this case, and we now have Jaspal Singh Manjpur, who's been here at the back end of the year, who's also really, I don't want to say congratulate, but he's also commended the UK Sikh community on their political pressure through their letter campaigning, through the pressuring of their MPs, and commended Breed and others, Martin and Tan and all the other MPs that have spoken on this issue, for the pressure they've done, because that has had an effect in Punjab.
I'd just also like to touch on the foreign minister, actually. So Gurpreet actually informally met Jeremy Hunt at a Christmas carol session outside Downing Street. And the fact that that was the first time that he's been able to meet the foreign minister in a completely informal kind of circumstance, chance almost, occasion, after over 420 days of incarceration for Jaggi in India. Actually, whilst all the campaigning has been very, very good and it's been positive, and as Manjpur has mentioned, it's been highly commendable from the UK community, I still feel, and certainly it's a feeling held by the entire community, that the Foreign Office must do more for Jagtar Singh Johal. And certainly it's incumbent on us in the community to certainly carry on pressing the Foreign Commonwealth Office to do more work.
Yep. I think we've been through a huge number of issues in the Sikh manifesto. We haven't touched upon all of them, but we've touched upon most. You know, the issue of religious freedoms in Europe and France with Brexit around the corner. We haven't even had an opportunity to talk about the various things that need to happen in 2019. I think we're going to have to do a separate programme on that specifically. But think about it, those identity-related issues, whether it be about the Offensive Weapons Bill, whether it be about the Code of Practice, whether it be about the census, whether it be about sites for the monuments here in Smethwick, in London, whether it be raising the human rights profile, whether it be about issues like self-determination, which is one of the issues we haven't expanded upon. You know, these things are being talked about. We read about them all the time. And we've now seen, you know, the American government saying it's the absolute right of people to talk about these things. And similarly, we're seeing this in Punjab now, seeing people raise their voices. So these are topics that we need to pick up on. And also, you know, you need hard facts. And often, you know, the UK Sikh survey touched on a range of issues in the manifesto. And this year, I think we're going to have another survey, because there could well be a general election. We need to update that manifesto. So I think these are things that we need your support, viewers watching KTV. Keep following the activities of the Sikh Network. Keep listening to the various issues and do your level best to try and support as many of these issues as you can, because without your support, without your lobbying, actually a few of us, 15 of us, cannot take forward these issues. It's only with your support we can move forward. I'd like to thank two guests. Time is just not with us. We will come back to you with an update on the things you can do in 2019. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.